The rain had been falling for 3 days straight, turning the main street of Cedar Ridge into a river of mud that sucked at boots and wagon wheels alike. Sarah Mae Whitfield stood under the awning of her father's general store, watching the gray curtain of water blur the world beyond. She was 18 that spring of 1854, with hair the color of prairie wheat and eyes that held more questions than a girl in a frontier town was supposed to ask. The Apache appeared through the rain like a ghost made flesh. One moment the street was empty save for the downpour. The next, he was there, leading a paint horse through the mire. Sarah's breath caught. She'd heard whispers of him, the lone Apache who traded with the white settlements, who belonged to no tribe and claimed no clan. But hearing tales and seeing the man himself were different things entirely. He was tall, taller than any man in Cedar Ridge, with shoulders broad enough to carry the weight of 2 worlds. Rain streamed down his face, following the lines of old scars that mapped stories she could only imagine. His hair, black as crow feathers, hung loose past his shoulders, and his eyes, when they swept across the storefronts and found hers, held the kind of solitude that echoed in her own heart. "Sarah Mae." Her father's voice cracked like a whip from inside the store. "Get away from that door, girl. Storm's bringing all manner of trouble to town." But she didn't move. Couldn't move. The Apache had stopped in the middle of the street, seemingly unbothered by the rain that plastered his worn cotton shirt to his chest. He was looking at her, really looking, as if he could see past the calico dress and proper upbringing to something wild that lived beneath. Sarah stepped out from under the awning. The rain hit her like cold needles, soaking through her dress in seconds, but she barely noticed. Her feet found their way through the mud, each step deliberate, each step taking her further from everything she was supposed to be. The townspeople who braved the storm ducked their heads and hurried past, pretending not to see James Whitfield's daughter walking toward the Apache in the middle of Main Street. "You shouldn't be out in this," he said when she was close enough to hear him over the rain. His voice was deep, roughened by wind and years, but there was something gentle in it too, like distant thunder. "Neither should you," Sarah replied, surprising herself with her boldness. Water ran into her eyes, and she pushed wet strands of hair from her face. "I'm Sarah Mae Whitfield. I know who you are." A ghost of something amusement perhaps crossed his features. "Everyone knows James Whitfield's daughter. And you, do you have a name?" He studied her for a long moment, and she felt the weight of that gaze like a physical thing. "They call me Samuel," he said finally. Samuel Crowfeather. It was a white man's first name grafted onto Apache roots, and she understood without asking that it was a name born of necessity, not choice, just as her proper lady's education was a coat that never quite fit right. "Why do you come here?" she asked. "To Cedar Ridge. I mean, they don't—" She faltered, gesturing vaguely at the buildings around them, where she knew eyes watched from behind curtains. "They don't want me here," he finished. "No, but I need supplies, same as any man. And your father, for all his rules about proper behavior, likes Apache silver well enough." Sarah felt heat rise in her cheeks despite the cold rain. Her father did indeed trade with Samuel, though he always made sure Sarah was sent on errands when the Apache came to town. Until today, when the storm had disrupted everyone's careful patterns. "I've watched you," she said suddenly, the words tumbling out before wisdom could stop them. "When you come to trade, you're always alone." Something shifted in his expression, a tightening around his eyes. "Alone is safer." "Is it?" She stepped closer, close enough to see the rain droplets caught in his eyelashes, close enough to smell leather and sage and something wild that belonged to open skies. "I don't think you believe that any more than I do." Thunder rolled across the plains, and for a moment the whole world seemed to hold its breath. Sarah's heart hammered against her ribs. She was 18, young enough to believe that one moment could change everything, old enough to know that some chances only came once. "I could love you," she said, the words fierce and desperate and absolutely true. "I know that sounds mad, but I feel it here. She pressed a hand to her chest, heedless of propriety. "I've felt it every time I've seen you ride into town, like recognizing something I've been looking for my whole life." Samuel's face went very still. The rain continued to fall around them, creating a private world in the middle of the street. When he spoke, his voice was careful, controlled. "You're young. Sarah Mae Whitfield. You don't know what you're saying." "I know exactly what I'm saying." Her chin came up. That stubborn streak that drove her father to distraction now aimed at this man who stood like a mountain in the storm. "I know that I'm tired of pretending to be satisfied with tea parties and church socials. I know that when I look at you, I see someone who understands what it means to not quite fit anywhere. And I know that if you ride away today without—" "Stop!" The word was gentle but firm. He reached out, and for one wild moment she thought he would touch her face. Instead, his hand hovered inches from her cheek before dropping back to his side. "You're too young, too—" He gestured at her soaked dress, her pale skin, the general store behind her with its promise of safety and belonging. "You don't know what you're asking." "Then tell me." She grabbed his hand, ignoring his flinch of surprise. His palm was rough with calluses, warm despite the rain. "Tell me what I'm asking." He looked down at their joined hands, and something raw crossed his face. "You're asking me to be the reason James Whitfield's daughter becomes a pariah. You're asking me to watch you lose everything: your family, your place, your future. You're asking me to be selfish enough to let you throw your life away for a man who can't even claim a tribe anymore." "I'm asking you to let me choose," Sarah said fiercely. "Everyone else in my life has decided who I should be, what I should want. You're the first person who's ever looked at me and seen something more than James Whitfield's daughter. Don't you dare decide for me too." He pulled his hand free, but gently. "You think you see something in me worth having, but you're seeing through young eyes. I've done things. Sarah Mae, survived things. I'm not some romantic figure from your books." "I don't read romantic books," she said, which was mostly true. "And I'm not as young as you think." "Yes," he said softly, "you are." The finality in his voice hit her like cold water. She stood there, rain streaming down her face, mixing with tears she refused to acknowledge, and watched him gather his horse's reins. "Wait," she called as he turned away. "Just wait." He paused, but didn't turn back. "When I'm not too young anymore," she said, her voice steady despite everything. "When I've lived enough to know my own mind beyond doubt, I'll find you again." He did turn then, and for just a moment she saw something flicker in those dark eyes: surprise, perhaps, or admiration. The world's a big place, Sarah Mae Whitfield, and time has a way of changing what we think we want. "Maybe," she admitted, "but maybe not. Maybe some things are worth waiting for, worth growing into." He studied her for a long moment, this rain-soaked girl with fire in her eyes and mud on her hem. Then he swung up onto his horse with an easy grace that made her heart ache. "Goodbye, Sarah Mae," he said, touching the brim of his hat. She stood in the rain until he disappeared into the gray distance, until her father came out shouting and dragged her inside, until the whole town was buzzing with scandal. But all she could think about was the way he'd said her name, like it was something worth remembering. That night, while her father raged and her mother wept, Sarah Mae sat by her window and watched the rain finally begin to ease. Somewhere out there, Samuel Crowfeather rode alone through the storm, but he carried with him the promise of a girl who would become a woman, and she carried the memory of being truly seen for the first time in her life. The rain stopped just before dawn, leaving the world washed clean and gleaming. Sarah Mae pressed her palm against the cold window glass and made a promise to the lightning sky. She would grow. She would learn. She would become someone who could choose her own path without regrets. And then, when the time was right, she would keep her word. The house had never felt smaller than it did in the days following the rain. Sarah Mae moved through the rooms like a ghost, serving tea to her mother's circle of church ladies who came to offer sympathy for her moment of madness. enduring her father's stony silence at dinner, listening to the whispers that followed her through town like tumbleweeds. The poor dear. Mrs. Henderson murmured over her teacup, speaking as if Sarah weren't standing right there with the sugar bowl. Such a shock to her parents. But young girls do get fanciful notions. She'll forget all about it once she meets a proper young man. Sarah's hand trembled only slightly as she poured the tea. She had learned, in the week since the rain, how to build walls inside herself, how to show them what they expected to see while keeping her true thoughts locked away like precious stones. That night, after the house had settled into sleep, she crept to her window and pushed it open. The night air carried the scent of sage and distant rain, and she breathed it in like medicine. The moon hung full and bright, illuminating the plains beyond town, the endless space where a man might ride alone with only the stars for company. "When I'm ready," she whispered to the night, "I'll come back to you." The words were swallowed by darkness, but speaking them aloud made them real, made them a promise instead of just a girl's fancy. She thought of Samuel's eyes, how they'd held years of solitude she couldn't yet understand, and wondered what he was doing at this moment. Was he camped somewhere under these same stars? Did he think of the foolish girl who declared her love in the rain? A coyote howled in the distance, and Sarah shivered. Though not from cold, there was so much she didn't know, so much her comfortable life in Cedar Ridge had never taught her. Samuel had been right about that much. She was young, sheltered, naive about the weight of the choice she wanted to make. But that could change. The next morning brought her father's announcement at breakfast. "The Reverend Morrison has a nephew coming to visit," James Whitfield said, not looking at his daughter. "A fine young man from St. Louis, studying to be a lawyer? Your mother thinks it would be appropriate for you to show him around town when he arrives." Sarah set down her fork carefully. "Yes, Father." Her easy acquiescence made him finally look at her, suspicion creasing his brow. But Sarah had already learned her first lesson in patience. Let them think she was recovering from her momentary lapse. Let them believe their careful plans would fix what they saw as broken. Days blended into weeks. The nephew arrived, Thomas Morrison, with soft hands and a tendency to quote poetry he didn't understand. Sarah walked with him, smiled at the right moments, and felt nothing but a vague pity for this man who saw only what he expected to see. When he left after 2 weeks, nursing a polite rejection, her parents' disappointment was palpable. "You didn't even try," her mother accused, tears threatening. "Sarah May, you must understand. After what happened, people talk, your opportunities." "I understand, Mother," Sarah said. And she did. She understood that they would never see her as anything more than a commodity to be traded for respectability, a problem to be solved with a suitable marriage. The knowledge sat in her chest like a stone, but it also freed her in a way. She could not disappoint them more than she already had, which meant she could begin to make her own plans. She started small, reading books her father wouldn't approve of, accounts of frontier life, stories of women who'd carved out existences beyond the boundaries of polite society. She learned to mend her own clothes, to recognize edible plants, to shoot her father's old pistol when he was away on business. Each skill was a small rebellion, a step toward becoming someone who could survive outside the narrow confines of Cedar Ridge. At night, she would stand at her window and repeat her promise. The words became a ritual, a tether to the choice she'd made in the rain. Sometimes she imagined she could feel him out there, could sense the connection that had sparked between them like lightning finding ground. Other nights, doubt crept in. What if he'd forgotten her already? What if her declaration had been nothing more than an amusing story he told around campfires? But then she would remember the way his hand had hovered near her cheek, the careful control in his voice when he'd told her she was too young. He'd been protecting her. She realized, not from him, but from a choice made in haste. The understanding made her love him more, even as it made the waiting harder. Autumn came, painting the plains gold and rust. Sarah helped with the harvest, ignoring her mother's protests about rough hands and sun-darkened skin. She wanted to be strong. She wanted to be someone who could pull her own weight, who could face hardship without breaking. "You're changing," her father said one evening, finding her reading by lamplight, "and not in ways that please me." Sarah looked up from her book, a treatise on frontier medicine. "I'm growing up. Father, isn't that what you wanted? I wanted you to grow into a proper lady. Instead, you're becoming—" He gestured helplessly at her simple dress, her sun-touched skin, the calluses on her hands. "I don't know what you're becoming." "I'm becoming myself," Sarah said quietly. "Finally." He left without another word, but she could feel his bewilderment, his grief for the daughter he thought he'd raised. It hurt, but not enough to stop her. Winter arrived with a vengeance, locking Cedar Ridge in snow and ice. Sarah used the forced confinement to study, to plan, to strengthen her resolve. She was 19 now, a year older and worlds wiser than the girl who'd stood in the rain. But she knew it wasn't enough. Not yet. The thaw brought unexpected news. A trader passing through mentioned seeing the lone Apache who matched Samuel's description, camping near Bent's Fort, a good 3 days' ride north. Sarah's heart leaped, then settled. She forced herself to walk calmly to her room, to close the door quietly, to press her hands against her racing heart until it slowed. She could find him. The knowledge was sweet torture. She could saddle a horse and ride north, could track him down and demand he acknowledge what had passed between them. But she wouldn't, because he'd been right. She had been too young. Not in years, perhaps, but in understanding. She'd offered him her heart without knowing the true cost of giving it. That night, her whispered promise carried new weight. "When I'm ready, I'll come back to you, and I'll be someone worth waiting for." Spring came again, and with it another suitor, a rancher's son with kind eyes and a gentle manner. Sarah refused him more gently than the others, recognizing a good man who deserved better than a woman whose heart had already chosen its path. "You're waiting for him," her mother said one day, finding Sarah at the window again. It wasn't a question. Sarah didn't deny it. "Yes, he's not coming back. Sarah May, men like that, they don't settle down. They don't change." "I'm not asking him to change," Sarah said. "I'm changing for myself, not for him. But yes, I'm waiting." Her mother's tears fell silently. "I've lost you, haven't I, my little girl?" Sarah turned from the window and embraced her mother, feeling the fragility in the older woman's shoulders. "You haven't lost me, Mama. I'm just becoming who I was meant to be. And someday, when I'm truly ready, I'll go find my happiness. But not yet. Not until I'm sure I can stand beside him as an equal, not a burden." They held each other in the fading light. Two women separated by dreams and generations, but united in the fierce love that ran between them. Outside, the plain stretched endless and patient, keeping their secrets, holding their promises. That night, Sarah's whispered words carried new certainty. She would keep her promise. She would grow into someone who could choose her path with open eyes and steady hands. And when that day came, she would ride out to find the man who'd seen her truly, even when she couldn't yet see herself. The moon rose full and bright, and somewhere in the vast darkness, she imagined Samuel Crowfeather raising his eyes to the same silver light, carrying the memory of a rain-soaked girl who'd been brave enough to speak her heart and wise enough to wait. 4 years, 4 harvests, 4 winters, 4 springs that brought wild flowers to the prairie and reminded Sarah May of promises made in the rain. She was 22 now, no longer the impetuous girl who'd shocked Cedar Ridge with her bold declaration. The years had carved her into something harder and softer, both like river stone, smooth on the surface, but unyielding at the core. Her father's general store had prospered, even as his daughter had become something of a curiosity in town. The spinster Whitfield girl, they called her now, though not unkindly. She'd refused 6 suitors in 4 years, each rejection delivered with such grave courtesy that the young men left more puzzled than hurt. She worked in the store, kept the books, learned to bargain with traders and ranchers with a sharp eye that surprised those who remembered the dreamy girl she'd been. "You've got a head for business," her father admitted one evening, reviewing the ledgers she'd balanced. "Better than I expected." Sarah didn't tell him that she'd been preparing for a life where such skills might mean survival, not just prosperity. She'd learned other things too, how to preserve meat, how to read weather signs, how to doctor injuries with herbs and whiskey when no physician could be found. Martha Yellowbird, the old Cheyenne woman who sold beadwork at the edge of town, had taught her which plants healed and which harmed, accepting Sarah's quiet company without questions. The news of Samuel came in fragments, like pieces of a broken mirror that reflected different angles of truth. A cavalry soldier mentioned the Apache scout who'd helped track renegades near the border. A traveling merchant spoke of the lone Indian who'd warned a wagon train about contaminated water. A rancher's wife whispered about the man who'd faced down 3 cattle thieves single-handed, then vanished like smoke before anyone could thank him. Sarah collected these stories, hoarding them like treasures. He was alive. He was still alone. He was surviving in the spaces between worlds, belonging fully to none. Each fragment of news was both comfort and torment. She could find him now. She knew. She had the skills, the determination, the money she'd saved. But something held her back, some instinct that whispered not yet. The turning point came with her mother's illness. It started small, a cough that lingered after winter, a tiredness that rest couldn't cure. By summer, Elizabeth Whitfield was confined to bed, her skin paper-thin, her breathing labored. Sarah tended her with the skills she'd learned, easing pain where she couldn't cure, holding vigil through long nights when death seemed to hover at the window. "I was wrong," her mother whispered one night, when the moon was dark and only candles held back the shadows. "About you, about him." Sarah's hands stilled on the compress she was preparing. "Mama, I thought love was safety," Elizabeth continued, her voice threadbare but clear. "I thought it was church socials and proper courtship and matching tablecloths. But watching you these years, the way you've grown, that's love too, the patient kind, the kind that makes you become more than you were." Tears slipped down Sarah's cheeks. "I learned from you, Mama, how to be strong, how to endure." "Then I taught you something worthwhile after all." Her mother's hand, bird-light, found Sarah's. "When I'm gone." "Don't say that. Listen to me. Sarah May, when I'm gone, don't let grief chain you here. You've waited long enough. Become who you're meant to be." Elizabeth Whitfield died as the first snow fell, peaceful at the last. The funeral drew all of Cedar Ridge, people who'd known her as the perfect minister's daughter, the ideal shopkeeper's wife. Only Sarah knew the woman who'd questioned her choices in the dark, who'd found her own kind of courage at the end. The winter that followed was the hardest yet. James Whitfield aged a decade in months, retreating into silence and ledgers. Sarah ran the store, ran the house, held together what remained of their family with Will alone. But at night, she stood at her window and felt the old restlessness stirring. Her mother's words echoed, "Don't let grief chain you here." Spring brought unexpected change. A letter arrived from Fort Laramie, written in the careful script of an army officer. Sarah's hands shook as she read. "Miss Whitfield, I am writing at the request of Samuel Crow Feather, who served as a scout for our garrison. He was gravely injured in a skirmish with raiders 3 weeks past. He recovers, by God's grace, but slowly. He asked that someone notify you, should the worst occur. He said you would want to know. He said you made a promise once, in the rain." The letter fell from numb fingers. Sarah stood frozen for a heartbeat. 2, then moved with sudden purpose. Within an hour, she had packed what she needed: medical supplies, provisions, the skills of 4 years' learning. Her father found her saddling their best horse as dawn broke. "You're leaving?" Not a question. "Yes." "For him?" "Yes." James Whitfield looked at his daughter, this woman who'd emerged from the chrysalis of girlhood when he wasn't watching. Will you come back? Sarah paused, her hand on the saddle.
I don't know. Father, maybe not, but I have to go.
He nodded slowly. Your mother would say you've waited long enough. She did say that. Then go. His voice roughened. Go with my blessing. Sarah May, become who you're meant to be. She kissed his weathered cheek, then swung into the saddle with the easy grace of someone who'd been preparing for this moment. The road stretched before her, muddy with spring melt, dangerous with possibilities. But Sarah May Whitfield, no longer too young, no longer unprepared, turned her horse north and rode toward whatever waited. Behind her, Cedar Ridge woke to another day, to gossip and speculation about the Whitfield girl's sudden departure. But Sarah didn't look back. She'd spent 4 years becoming someone who could make this choice with open eyes. Now, with her mother's blessing like wind at her back and her father's understanding like solid ground beneath her, she rode toward a promise made in the rain. The journey would be hard. She knew that. There would be no guarantee of welcome at the end, no certainty that what had sparked between them still lived. But Sarah had learned patience in these 4 years, had learned that some things were worth the risk of heartbreak. As the sun climbed higher, burning off the morning mist, she remembered Samuel's words. Time has a way of changing what we think we want. Perhaps he was right. Perhaps she would find that the man she'd built from fragments of story and memory bore no resemblance to reality. Perhaps he would look at her and see only a stranger shaped by years and loss. But perhaps not. Perhaps some promises, like some loves, only grew stronger for the waiting. Perhaps 2 people who'd learned to survive alone might discover they could be stronger together. The miles fell away beneath her horse's hooves. Sarah rode north, toward Fort Laramie, toward uncertainty, toward a man who'd asked for her to be notified if he died. That alone told her what she needed to know he'd remembered. Through 4 years of solitude, through danger and distance, he'd remembered the girl in the rain. Now she would show him the woman she'd become. The sun reached its zenith, and Sarah paused at a stream to water her horse. She looked at her reflection in the clear water, sun-browned face, steady eyes, hands that knew work and purpose. Not beautiful by Cedar Ridge standards, perhaps, but strong, real, ready. I'm coming, Samuel, she said to the listening sky. I kept my promise. I grew up. I became someone who can stand beside you without fear. Now let's see if you kept yours, if you're still the man who saw me truly, even when I couldn't see myself. She mounted again and rode on, into the vast promise of the plains, toward whatever ending or beginning waited at Fort Laramie. The girl who'd loved at 18 was gone. In her place rode a woman who'd earned the right to choose her path, whatever the cost. Fort Laramie sprawled against the horizon like a collection of wooden blocks dropped by a careless giant's hand. Sarah arrived as the sun touched the mountains, painting everything gold and shadow. The sergeant at the gate looked her over with the weary eyes of a man who'd seen too much strangeness to be surprised by anything. I'm looking for Samuel Crowfeather, she said. I received word he was injured. The sergeant's expression shifted. The Apache scout, yeah, he's here, or was, checked himself out of the infirmary 2 days ago, against doctor's orders. Last I heard, he'd made camp about 3 miles north, near Settler's Creek. Said the walls made him restless. He shook his head. Man took a bullet meant for Captain Morrison. You'd think he'd accept a proper bed while healing. Sarah's heart clenched. Of course Samuel wouldn't stay penned within walls, even wounded. Thank you, Sergeant. Miss, he called as she turned to go. That's rough country, and getting dark. Maybe wait until morning. I've waited 4 years. Sergeant, I can't wait another night. She found his camp as the last light faded, guided by the thin smoke of a careful fire. Sarah dismounted at a distance, knowing better than to approach unannounced. The skills Martha Yellowbird had taught her served her now how to move quietly, how to read the land. You can come in, Sarah May. His voice, coming from the darkness beyond the fire, made her knees weak. 4 years of imagining this moment, and still she wasn't prepared for the way it hollowed her out and filled her up at once. She led her horse forward, into the circle of firelight, and finally saw him. The years had carved him deeper, like wind on stone. His hair, still long, now carried threads of silver that caught the light. New scars marked his face and arms, stories written in flesh. He sat propped against a fallen log, blankets wrapped around his shoulders, and she could see the bulk of bandages beneath his shirt. But his eyes, those dark eyes that had haunted her dreams, remained unchanged. Still deep, still solitary, still seeing too much. "You came," he said simply. "You asked for me to be notified." Sarah tethered her horse and moved closer, her medical training already cataloging his condition, pale beneath the bronze of his skin, lines of pain around his mouth, the careful way he held himself.
How bad?
"I've had worse." "That's not an answer." A ghost of a smile touched his lips. "Still direct? Good. I was afraid town life might have softened that out of you."
Town life tried.
Sarah knelt beside him, close enough to smell sage and leather and the bitter herbs of healing poultices. "May I?" He nodded, and she gently pulled back the blanket, examining the bandages with experienced hands. The wound was high on his chest, just below the collarbone. Serious but clean. Someone had done good work. "The army doctor is skilled," Samuel said, watching her face, "even if he is too fond of walls and schedules. You need rest, real rest, not camping in the cold." "I need sky." His hand caught hers, stilling her ministrations. "Sarah May, why are you here?" She met his gaze steadily. "You know why. 4 years is a long time. You could have married, had children, built a safe life."
I could have.
She turned her hand in his, threading their fingers together. His palm was still rough, still warm.
I chose not to.
"Why?" "Because a wise man once told me I was too young to know my own mind. So I grew older. I learned my mind, my heart, my strength, and they all still choose you." He was quiet for a long moment, firelight playing across his features. When he spoke, his voice was rough.
"I thought about you, more than I should have. The girl in the rain who offered her heart like it was simple."
"It was simple. It still is."
"No."
He shook his head. "Nothing about this is simple. I have no home to offer you, no place in your world or mine. I'm a man between Sarah May. That hasn't changed."
"I'm not asking for it to change."
She shifted closer, feeling the heat of him through the blankets.
"I'm not the girl who stood in the rain anymore. Samuel, I've learned to shoot, to ride, to heal. I can read sign and preserve meat and birth foals. I've spent 4 years becoming someone who could survive beside you, not behind you."
His free hand rose, hovering near her cheek just as it had years ago. But this time, he didn't pull back. His fingers brushed her skin, feather-light, wondering. "Your hands are rough now," he observed. "Working hands. Does that disappoint you?" "No." The word came fierce and quick. "It makes me hope for things I have no right to hope for." "You have every right." Sarah turned her face into his palm, closing her eyes.
"I've loved you for 4 years,
through silence and distance and doubt. I've loved the idea of you, and now I want the chance to love the reality. Unless..." She opened her eyes, suddenly uncertain. "Unless you don't." He kissed her. It was nothing like the romantic kisses she'd imagined in her girlhood dreams. It was desperate and careful both, flavored with pain from his wound and wonder at her presence. It was a first kiss that felt like a continuation, as if the 4 years between had been just a held breath, now released. When they parted, Sarah saw tears on his face, silver in the firelight. "I told myself you'd forget," he whispered. "A passing fancy. I told myself every day for 4 years that you'd moved on, found someone worthy of you."
"I did find someone worthy."
She wiped his tears with the gentle fingers. He just took some convincing. He laughed then, soft and wondering. You've become formidable. Sarah May Whitfield. Just Sarah now. Sarah who chooses her own path. They sat in silence for a while, hands linked, relearning each other's presence. The fire crackled, sending sparks into the darkness. Sarah felt the weight of the moment, not an ending but a beginning, fragile as new ice. I can't go back to Cedar Ridge, Samuel said eventually. Not to live walls, even wooden ones. I know. I didn't come here to drag you back to town life. Then what did you come for? Sarah looked at him, this man she'd waited for, worked for, transformed herself for, but not just for him, she realized. For herself, too, for the woman she'd needed to become. I came to see if what we have is real, if it can grow into something lasting. I came to offer you partnership, not surrender. I have money saved, skills learned. We could build something together, a small ranch, maybe, somewhere between worlds. A place where an Apache scout and a shopkeeper's daughter could just be Samuel and Sarah. You'd leave everything for that possibility. I already have. She gestured at the darkness beyond the fire. My horse carries everything I need. The rest is just things, and things can be replaced. Samuel studied her for a long moment, and she saw him truly seeing her, not the rain-soaked girl, but the woman she'd fought to become. His hand tightened on hers. There's land north of here, he said slowly. Good water, sheltered valley. Far enough from town to breathe. Close enough to trade. I've had my eye on it for years, but never had reason to claim it. And now, he lifted their joined hands, pressed his lips to her weather-roughened knuckles. Now I have reason. Sarah's heart soared, but she kept her voice steady. You need to heal first, and we need to learn each other again. 4 years of dreams don't make a life. Practical, too, now. When did that happen? Somewhere between the third rejected suitor and learning to deliver a breech calf. He laughed again, easier this time. Stay with me tonight, just to talk, to start learning each other again. Just to talk. I'm wounded. Remember, and you're a lady, despite the rough hands. I haven't been a lady for a long time. Samuel Crow Feather. I'm just a woman who knows what she wants. They talked through the night, voices weaving stories of the years between. Sarah told him about her mother's death, her father's blessing, the long journey of becoming. Samuel spoke of his years as a scout, the loneliness that had become familiar as breathing, the way her memory had haunted him. When dawn came, painting the world in pastels, they were still talking, still learning, still choosing each other with every word and silence. No promises yet, Sarah said as the sun climbed. Just possibilities. I can work with possibilities. Samuel agreed. I've been living on one for 4 years. She kissed him softly, tasting hope and challenge both. Whatever came next, she was ready for it. The girl who'd loved at 18 had grown into a woman who could build a life anywhere, with anyone. That she chose to build it with him, that was the gift of patience, of time, of becoming. The morning light found them planning, dreaming, beginning the slow work of weaving 2 solitary lives into something new and strong, and theirs. Summer had settled over the valley like a golden blanket, bringing life to the small ranch Sarah and Samuel had carved from wilderness. 3 months had passed since she'd found him wounded at Fort Laramie. 3 months of building first trust, then walls, then a life. Their cabin sat nestled against a hillside, modest but solid, with a view that stretched for miles. Sarah was mending harnesses on the porch when she heard the horses. 3 riders, moving with the deliberate pace of men who wanted to be seen coming. She set aside her work and checked the rifle propped against the doorframe, a habit Samuel had insisted on. "Company," she called through the open door. Samuel emerged, moving easier now, though the wound still pulled when he worked too hard. His hand found her shoulder, a brief touch of reassurance, before he stepped to the edge of the porch, The riders were from Cedar Ridge. Sarah recognized Tom Hutchins, who'd taken over as sheriff after old Walt died, and the banker's son, Joseph Clearwater. The third was Elijah Morse, owner of the largest ranch in the county, and a man who'd never hidden his opinion about Indians or the women who consorted with them. Sarah May. Sheriff Hutchins touched his hat brim, pointedly not acknowledging Samuel. Your father asked us to check on you.
That was kind of him.
Sarah kept her voice neutral.
As you can see, I'm well.
Morse's eyes traveled over the cabin, the corrals, the small herd of horses in the distance. His gaze lingered on Samuel with undisguised contempt. So it's true. James Whitfield's daughter has taken up with a savage. Samuel's stillness beside her was like that of a cougar before it springs. But Sarah stepped forward, drawing the men's attention back to her. Mr. Morse, you're on our land. I'll ask you to keep a civil tongue or leave. Your land, Clearwater sneered. A white woman can't file a land claim with an Indian. Everyone knows that.
The claim is in my name alone,
Sarah said evenly.
All legal and proper. Filed at the land office in Cheyenne. Would you like to see the papers?
She saw the surprise flicker across their faces. They'd expected to find her living in sin and squalor, dependent on Samuel's charity. Instead, they found a working ranch with her name on the deed, her money that had bought the starter herd, her planning evident in every detail. Your father is heartbroken, Hutchins said, and she heard genuine regret in his voice. Tom had always been decent, even if he rode with men who weren't, and the whole town talks about how you've thrown your life away.
Have I?
Sarah gestured at the land around them.
I have a home, productive work, a partner who respects me.
How many women in Cedar Ridge can say the same? Partner. Morse spat the word like it tasted bad. Is that what you call it? And when he gets tired of playing house, when he remembers what he is and disappears into the wilderness, you'll come crawling back to town, ruined and desperate, and expect decent folk to take you in. No, Sarah said quietly.
I won't.
The simple certainty in her voice seemed to anger Morse more than defiance would have. His face flushed red above his collar. You've shamed your family, girl.
Shamed your race. There'll be consequences.
Is that a threat, Mr. Morse? The sheriff stirred uneasily.
Now, Elijah.
It's a promise. Morse cut him off. This valley's too close to Cedar Ridge for comfort. Good Christian folk shouldn't have to know such an abomination exists. There are ways to make unwelcome neighbors move on. Samuel spoke for the first time, his voice carrying the kind of quiet that preceded thunder. You're welcome to try. Morse's hand twitched toward his gun, but Hutchins was already turning his horse. We've delivered the message. Come on, boys. This isn't over, Morse promised, but he followed the sheriff, Clearwater trailing behind with one last contemptuous look. Sarah and Samuel watched until the riders disappeared over the ridge. Only then did she feel the trembling in her legs, the aftermath of confrontation. They'll be back, Samuel said.
I know.
It'll get worse. Morse has influence, money, men who'll do what he says for pay.
I know that too.
He turned to study her face. You could still go back, make peace with your father. Tell them I forced you, that you've seen the error. Sarah stopped his words with a fierce kiss. When she pulled back, her eyes blazed. Don't insult me, Samuel Crowfeather. I knew what I was choosing. I counted the cost before I ever left Cedar Ridge. The cost keeps rising. Then we'll pay it. She took his face between her hands. Together. Or did you think I learned to shoot for the pleasure of it? Despite everything, he smiled. You do take pleasure in it. I've seen you with the targets.
True.
She released him, turning to look out over their valley. We need to prepare. Morse won't wait long. He'll start small-cut fences, scattered stock. When that doesn't work, it'll turn ugly. Samuel's arms came around her from behind, pulling her against his chest. I can leave. Draw them off. You could keep the land.
Say I abandoned you. If you finish that thought, you'll be sleeping in the barn for a week.
You're stubborn as a mule, woman.
You knew that when you kissed me by the fire. They stood together, watching the sun slant across their land. Sarah could feel the storm coming, like electricity in the air before lightning strikes. But she felt no regret, no desire to turn back. The girl who'd stood in the rain 4 years ago had dreamed of love. The woman she'd become understood that love was just the beginning. The real test was in the choosing, day after day, in the face of whatever came. We should send word to Martha Yellowbird, she said, and the Hendricks family. They've been friendly. If Morse is going to move against us, we need to know who might stand with us.
Already thinking tactics. I've corrupted you completely.
You've freed me completely. She turned in his arms. Now come inside. That wound needs checking, and we have plans to make.
Over the following days, the harassment began exactly as Sarah had predicted. Fences cut in the night. Horses driven off and scattered. The creek temporarily dammed upstream to flood their eastern pasture. Each morning brought new damage, new work to repair what had been destroyed. But also each morning brought unexpected support. Martha Yellowbird's grandson, Paul, arrived to help fix fences. The Hendricks sent their eldest boy with supplies and an offer of aid. Even Tom Hutchins rode out, officially to investigate the vandalism. But his quiet warning about Morse's growing rage was worth more than any investigation.
He's got a dozen men ready to ride, the sheriff said, accepting Sarah's offer of coffee. Talking about cleaning out the valley, making it safe for decent folk. I can't stop him, not legally. He's too careful for that.
We don't expect you to, Samuel said. Just remember what you've seen here when the story starts spreading.
Hutchins looked around the tidy cabin, the evidence of hard work and peaceful living.
I'll remember.
A week later, Sarah woke to the smell of smoke. The small barn they'd built for feed storage was ablaze, flames reaching toward the stars. They fought it with buckets and blankets, managing to save most of the stock, but the building was a loss.
Getting bolder, Samuel observed as they watched the last embers die with dawn.
Sarah's face was streaked with soot and tears, but her voice stayed steady.
Let them.
Every escalation shows their true nature. We're building something here. Samuel, they're only destroying.
He pulled her close, tasting smoke and determination.
How did I deserve you? You waited, she said simply. We both did. That has to count for something.
Word of the fire spread. More neighbors came, some out of curiosity, others offering help. The widow Martinez, who'd lost her husband to raiders years back, brought food and stayed to help Sarah plant a kitchen garden.
Men like Morse think they own the world, she said, hands deep in soil. Sometimes they need reminding they don't. But Sarah knew the worst was coming. She could feel it in the way the valley held its breath, in the unusual silence of the birds. When Samuel rode out to check the horses that evening, she stood on the porch and watched the horizon, rifle close at hand. The storm was coming, but here, on land she'd claimed with her own hands, beside a man she'd chosen with her whole heart, Sarah May Whitfield would weather it. She'd spent 4 years becoming someone who could. Now it was time to prove it. The storm announced itself with thunder that rolled across the valley like war drums. Sarah had been watching the western sky all day, seeing the clouds build into dark mountains that swallowed the sun. The air grew thick and electric, making the horses pace restlessly in the corral.
Samuel had been gone since noon, riding out to move their small herd to higher ground. She'd wanted to go with him, but they'd both known this was the opportunity Morse had been waiting for one of them alone. Vulnerable. The first fat drops of rain were falling when she heard the horses. Many horses, moving fast. Sarah checked the loads in Samuel's Winchester and her father's old pistol, then stepped onto the porch. Lightning flashed, illuminating a dozen riders spreading out in a half circle before the cabin. Morse sat at their center, water already streaming from his hat brim. The men with him were hard cases, hired guns, and drifters who'd do anything for pay. Several held torches that sputtered in the rain, and Sarah's stomach clenched at the memory of their burning barn. "Evening, Miss Whitfield," Morse called over the rising wind. "Quite a storm coming. State your business, Mr. Morse."
"Why, I'm here to make you a generous offer." His smile was cold as the rain. "Seems you've had some bad luck lately. Accidents happen out here, away from civilization. A woman alone."
"I'm not alone. No, I don't see your pet savage anywhere." He leaned forward in his saddle. "Here's my offer. I'll buy this land for twice what you paid. You take the money, go back east where you belong, and we all forget this unfortunate chapter."
"And if I refuse?"
Lightning split the sky, showing her the cruel anticipation on the men's faces. These weren't the townsmen who'd looked away when she walked Cedar Ridge's streets. These were wolves who'd been promised prey. "Then we'll have to conclude our business another way," Morse said. "The boys here are eager to teach a lesson about what happens to white women who forget their place. Though I promise you, after tonight, you'll wish you'd taken my offer."
Sarah raised the Winchester, rain running down the barrel. "Any man who sets foot on my porch dies."
Some of the riders laughed. One started to dismount. The shot came from the darkness, taking the man's hat clean off. He scrambled back onto his horse as Samuel materialized from the storm like something born of earth and rain. He moved through the downpour silent as smoke, water streaming from his body. And Sarah saw several of the hired guns shift nervously. "The lady asked you to state your business," Samuel said. Another rifle held easy in his hands. "You've stated it. Now leave." Morse's face twisted with rage. "You dare!"
"I dare much for her."
Samuel moved closer to the porch, never taking his eyes off the riders. "As she dares much for me. That's what you can't understand."
"Morse, what none of you can understand."
"Love," Morse spat the word. "You think this is about love? It's about order, about keeping bloodlines pure and women in their proper place."
"No,"
Sarah said quietly, but her voice carried even over the rain. "It's about fear. You're afraid that if one woman can choose her own path, others might follow. You're afraid that your ordered world might not be the only way." Thunder crashed overhead, and in the momentary illumination, she saw uncertainty flicker across some of the riders' faces. These men had come for easy violence against a defenseless woman. Instead, they faced two people willing to die for their choices. "Take them," Morse ordered. Several things happened at once. Lightning struck the old cottonwood near the corral, exploding it in a shower of sparks. The horses went mad, breaking through the rails and stampeding directly through the line of riders. In the chaos, Sarah saw men thrown from saddles, torches extinguished in puddles, curses lost in the crescendo of rain. Samuel was in motion, using the confusion to position himself between the scattered attackers and the cabin, but there were too many. And as the horses passed, the men regrouped. Sarah counted muzzle flashes in the darkness. 1, 2, 3 shots that sent splinters flying from the porch posts. "Inside," Samuel shouted, but Sarah held her ground, the Winchester steady in her hands. If they were going to die tonight, she'd die standing beside him, not cowering behind walls. A rider broke from the group, charging the porch with a torch still burning despite the rain. Sarah's shot took him in the shoulder, spinning him from the saddle. The torch flew wild, landing in the wet grass where it sputtered and died. But more were coming. She saw Samuel go down to one knee, blood dark on his shirt, the old wound torn open, or a new one. She couldn't tell. Lightning turned the world white and black in stuttering glimpses. Morse raising a pistol. 2 men circling behind the cabin. Samuel struggling to reload with slick hands. This was how it would end. Then, Sarah felt a strange peace settle over her. They'd built something here, even if it lasted only months. They'd proven that love could grow in the space between worlds. That choice mattered more than convention. That would have to be enough. Then new thunder rolled across the valley hoofbeats. Dozens of them. Riders poured from the tree line, and Sarah's heart recognized them before her eyes could make sense of the storm-broken darkness. Martha Yellowbird's grandson, Paul, the Hendricks boys, the widow Martinez's vaqueros, Tom Hutchins wearing his sheriff's star, even some faces she recognized from Cedar Ridge men who'd decided, perhaps, that Morse had gone too far. "That's enough, Elijah," Hutchins shouted. "No law against a woman living where she pleases, with who she pleases." "You'd take their side," Morse's voice cracked with disbelief. "I'm taking the law's side," the sheriff replied. "And right now, you and your boys are trespassing on legally claimed land. Move on, or I'll arrest the lot of you." For a moment, the tableau held Morse's hired guns facing the unexpected wall of neighbors and lawmen, rain falling like a curtain between them. Sarah kept her rifle trained on Morse. Seeing the calculation in his eyes, he could push this to bloodshed. But the cost had suddenly multiplied beyond his expectations. "This isn't over," he finally snarled. "You think you've won something here? She's still a race traitor, and he's still a savage. That won't change." "No," Samuel said, getting slowly to his feet. Sarah saw him sway, saw the blood spreading across his shirt, but his voice stayed strong. "What won't change is that she chose me, and I chose her. Every day. We choose each other. That's stronger than your hate. Morse. It'll outlast it." Morse turned his horse, his men following reluctantly. Some looked relieved they'd signed on for easy violence. Not a real fight. As they disappeared into the storm, the neighbors closed ranks around the cabin. "Let's get him inside," Martha Yellowbird commanded, taking charge with the authority of her years. "Paul, bring my medicine bag." They carried Samuel into the cabin, and Sarah worked beside Martha to clean and bind the wound a graze along his ribs. Painful but not deep. Around them, neighbors filled the small space, bringing coffee and food and stories of how word had spread, how they'd chosen to ride through the storm. "Community," the widow Martinez said simply when Sarah tried to thank her. "You build it by standing for each other." As dawn broke, the storm had passed, leaving the world washed and gleaming. Most of the neighbors had gone, but Tom Hutchins lingered on the porch, watching the sun paint the valley gold. "Morse won't try this again," he said. "Not after tonight. He knows the whole county would hear about it." "Will there be others?" Sarah asked, exhausted but unable to rest. "Probably. The world's full of small men who hate what they don't understand. But after tonight," he gestured at the valley, where the evidence of the night's ride still marked the mud. "You're not alone. Remember that." After he left, Sarah found Samuel sitting up in bed, staring out the window at their land. She curled beside him, careful of his bandages. "We survived," she said. "We did more than that." He pulled her close. "We showed them that bridges can be built between worlds, that love is stronger than hate, if you're willing to fight for it." "Worth the wait?" she asked, remembering the girl who'd made promises in the rain. "Worth everything," he replied, and kissed her as the morning light blessed their small, hard-won piece of earth. The morning after the storm found Sarah kneeling in the mud beside Samuel, rain still dripping from the eaves as she checked his wound one final time. The riders who'd come to their aid had stayed through the night, and now Tom Hutchins stood ready with the last of Morse's men disarmed, subdued, but still dangerous in their hatred. Morse himself was on his knees, hands bound, his fine clothes ruined by mud and rain, but his eyes still burned with the kind of rage that would never fully die. Samuel had dragged himself from bed despite Sarah's protests, standing bare-chested in the doorway, the bandages stark white against his skin. "You have him," Samuel said to the sheriff. "What now?" "Now we let the law handle it." Hutchins replied, "Attempted murder, destruction of property, terroristic threats. He'll see trial. A white man's court won't convict him for attacking an Indian and his woman," one of Morse's men sneered. Sarah stepped forward. rifle still in her hands but lowered. Perhaps not, but they'll convict him for attacking a legal landowner, for bringing hired guns to terrorize law-abiding citizens, for trying to drive out settlers through violence. She moved closer to where Morse knelt, her voice dropping but still clear in the morning air. You came here with torches and guns, Mr. Morse. You came to hurt us, perhaps kill us, because you couldn't bear the thought of a woman choosing her own path. You chose to lie with animals, Morse spat, to pollute your blood, disgrace your family. The crack of the rifle butt against the ground silenced him. Sarah stood over him, and for the first time, he saw something in her eyes that made him shrink back. I chose love, she said, each word deliberate as hammer strikes. I chose a man who sees me as an equal, who built beside me instead of trying to own me. I chose courage over comfort, truth over the lies your world tells itself. She turned to address not just Morse, but all the watching men. You think this is about race, about blood, about the order of things, but it's really about fear. You're terrified that if one woman can choose freely, they all might. That if love can cross the boundaries you've drawn, those boundaries mean nothing. Lightning flickered in the distance, a reminder of the storm's power. But Sarah's voice carried its own thunder. I've bled for this land. I've worked it, defended it, made it bloom. Samuel has done the same. We've proven that two people from different worlds can build something together that's stronger than either could build alone. She gestured to the neighbors who'd ridden to their aid, Mexican vaqueros, white homesteaders, Martha Yellowbird and her grandson. Look around you, Mr. Morse. This is the future. People choosing connection over division, community over hatred. Your world is already ending. You just can't see it yet. Pretty words, Morse sneered, but his voice lacked conviction. You think one night changes anything you think. Samuel could kill you right now, Sarah interrupted, her tone conversational. By the laws of his people and the codes of this frontier, he'd have every right. You came to our home with violence. You threatened what's his. She knelt beside Morse, bringing her face level with his. But he won't. And do you know why? Because I'm asking him not to. Because I won't let your blood poison what we've built here. Because mercy is stronger than vengeance. And love is stronger than your hate. She stood, turning to Samuel. The morning light caught the tears on her face, but her voice never wavered. Don't let him make you into what he thinks you are. You're better than that. We're better than that. Samuel stood silent for a long moment, and she could see the war in him, the part that had survived violence with violence, against the man who'd learned gentleness at her hands. Around them, everyone waited, the morning holding its breath. Finally, Samuel nodded. Take him. Sheriff, let your law deal with him. We have better things to do than waste more time on small men with smaller minds. Hutchins motioned his deputies forward. As they hauled Morse to his feet, the broken man looked back at Sarah with something like bewilderment. I don't understand you, he said. I know, Sarah replied simply. That's why you lost. They watched the riders leave, Morse and his men under guard, neighbors offering final words of support before heading to their own homes. Soon, only Sarah and Samuel remained, standing in their storm-battered yard as the sun climbed higher. You could have let me kill him, Samuel said quietly. Part of you wanted to. Part of me did. Sarah admitted. The part that's angry and tired and sick of fighting for the right to exist. But that's not who I want to be. It's not who we are. She took his hand, careful of his injuries. 4 years ago, a girl stood in the rain and offered her heart to a stranger. She thought love was enough. But that woman who stood here today, she knows love is just the beginning. It's what we build with it that matters. And what have we built? Samuel asked, though his eyes said he already knew. A place where difference doesn't mean division, where strength comes from choosing each other, again and again, no matter what storms come, where mercy matters more than vengeance. She squeezed his hand. We've built a home, Samuel. Not just these walls, but something deeper. Something worth defending without destroying ourselves in the process. He pulled her close, mindful of his bandages, and she felt the trembling in him aftermath of pain and anger, and the terrible choice she'd asked him to make. When I saw him there, when I thought of what he intended, his voice roughened. The old me would have painted the earth with his blood and called it justice. But you didn't. Because you asked me not to. Because you showed me another way. He pressed his lips to her hair. You saved me tonight, Sarah. Not from them, from myself. We saved each other, she corrected. That's what partners do. They stood together as the morning unfolded, watching their valley emerge from shadow into light. The storm had left damaged broken fences, scattered tools, the burned barn's blackened remains, but it had also left something else, the knowledge that they weren't alone, that community could be chosen and created, that love could indeed be stronger than hate when people stood together. Your father will hear about this, Samuel said eventually. The whole county will know what happened here. Good, Sarah said firmly. Let them know that Sarah Mae Whitfield stood with Samuel Crowfeather against violence and chose mercy. Let them know that neighbors came together across all lines to defend what's right. Let them talk about that instead of scandal and shame. A rider appeared on the ridge, Tom Hutchins returning. He stopped at a respectful distance and called out, Thought you should know Morse broke down on the ride, confessed to hiring those men, to the barn burning. All of it. With the witnesses from last night, he'll see real justice. Thank you, Tom, Sarah called back. For everything. The sheriff touched his hat. Ma'am, what you said back there about the future. I've got daughters. I want them to grow up in a world where they can choose their own paths too. Figured it was time I started working toward that. He rode on, leaving them with the gift of understanding. Sarah felt something ease in her chest. Another small bridge built, another heart opened just a crack. We should go in, she said to Samuel. That wound needs rest, and we have rebuilding to do. In a moment, he turned her to face him, his dark eyes serious. Sarah, what you did today, the mercy you showed, the words you spoke, I need you to know something. What? That 18-year-old girl who stood in the rain? She was brave, but she was also right. She saw who I could become before I did. She saw this moment, this choice, this life we could build. Her love wasn't foolish, it was prophetic. Sarah felt tears come again, but these were different, clean and healing as rain. And the man who sent her away to grow, he was wise enough to know that love needed seasoning to last, that we both had to choose it with full understanding. Do you, he asked, understand fully after last night, after seeing the worst of what we'll face? I understand that it won't be easy, that there will be more Morses, more storms, more nights when we stand against the world. But I also understand that we won't stand alone, that love isn't just what two people feel, it's what they build, who they become, how they change the world around them just by refusing to let hate win. She touched his face, feeling the roughness of stubble, the warmth of life. I choose you, Samuel Crowfeather, today and tomorrow and all the days after, not because it's easy, but because it's right, because you see me truly, and I see you, and together we see a future worth fighting for. He kissed her then, there in the morning light with their damaged land around them and the promise of hard work ahead. But it was a kiss of partnership, of equals who'd faced the storm and chosen mercy over vengeance, love over ease. When they finally went inside, Sarah paused at the threshold to look back at their valley. The sun had burned off the last of the storm clouds, leaving the sky a clean, endless blue. Somewhere a meadowlark sang, and the world felt new-made, full of possibility. They'd won more than a fight last night. They'd proven that the future didn't belong to the Morses of the world, but to those brave enough to build bridges where others saw only divisions. And that was worth every scar, every struggle, every patient year of becoming. The rain had washed the world clean, leaving the morning air sharp with the scent of sage and new earth. Sarah stood on the porch of their cabin, watching the sun paint the valley in shades of gold and green. The storm damage was already being repaired, neighbors had returned to help, and the sound of hammers and saws filled the air like a promise of renewal. Samuel emerged from the cabin, moving carefully but steadily. The wound was healing well, though Sarah insisted on checking it twice daily. He carried 2 cups of coffee, the steam rising like incense in the cool morning. "Martha Yellowbird says you saved my life," he said, handing her a cup. "Again." "Martha exaggerates." Sarah accepted the coffee gratefully. "I just refuse to let you die. There's a difference." "Is there?" He stood beside her, their shoulders touching. "Seems to me that's what we've been doing all along, refusing to let each other disappear into what the world expected." They stood in comfortable silence, watching their neighbors work. Paul Yellowbird was teaching the Hendricks boys how to mend fence the Apache way, stronger and more flexible. The widow Martinez had brought her best breeding mare as a gift, saying their herd needed blood as strong as its owners. "Your father's coming," Samuel said quietly. Sarah followed his gaze to the ridge, where a lone rider approached at a measured pace. She recognized the straight-backed posture, the careful horsemanship of a man more comfortable behind a counter than in a saddle. "I know. Tom Hutchins sent word." "Do you want me to leave, give you privacy?" "No." She took his hand. "Whatever he's come to say, we'll hear it together." James Whitfield rode into their yard looking older than his years. The neighbors paused in their work, watching, but he paid them no mind. His eyes were fixed on his daughter, this woman who'd grown from the girl he'd tried so hard to shape into something proper and safe. He dismounted slowly, removing his hat. "Sarah May." "Father." His gaze shifted to Samuel, and for a long moment, the 2 men studied each other. Then James did something that made Sarah's breath catch. He extended his hand. "Mr. Crowfeather, I believe I owe you thanks for protecting my daughter." Samuel accepted the handshake, his expression carefully neutral. "She protected herself, Mr. Whitfield, and me. Your daughter is formidable." "Yes," James said softly. "She is, though I'm only now beginning to understand that." He turned back to Sarah. "I came to see for myself. The stories reaching town, about what happened here, about how you stood against Morse and chose mercy. They didn't sound like the daughter I thought I knew." "Maybe you never knew me, Father. Maybe you only knew who you wanted me to be." The words could have been cruel, but Sarah spoke them gently, with the understanding that comes from surviving storms. James nodded slowly. "Your mother tried to tell me. Near the end, she said you had a strength I couldn't see because I was too busy trying to protect you from needing it." He looked around the homestead, taking in the evidence of hard work and harder choices. She was right. She usually was. "She told me not to let grief chain me to Cedar Ridge," Sarah said. "She gave me permission to become who I needed to be." "And this is who you needed to be, a rancher's wife in a valley most folks are too scared to settle." "A rancher," Sarah corrected. "Samuel's partner, not his wife, not yet. Anyway, we're building something together. Father, something new." James was quiet for a moment, processing this. Then he reached into his saddlebag and withdrew a leather folder. "Your mother left something for you. She made me promise to bring it when I was ready to see you as you are, not as I wished you were." Sarah took the folder with trembling hands. Inside was the deed to her mother's family, land back east, valuable property that had been in the family for generations, and a letter in Elizabeth Whitfield's careful script. "My dearest Sarah," she read aloud, her voice catching. "If you are reading this, then you have found your path and your father has found the wisdom to accept it. The land is yours to keep or sell as you see fit. Build your dreams. My brave girl, love freely, live fully, and know that somewhere beyond this veil, your mother's heart sings with pride." Tears flowed freely down Sarah's face. Samuel's arm came around her, steady and sure, while her father stood awkwardly, a man trying to bridge the gap his own fears had created. "I've been a fool," James said finally. "I let my terror of losing you make me try to cage you. But you were never meant for cages, were you?"
"No, Father, but that doesn't mean I was meant to fly away forever either."
Sarah wiped her tears and stepped forward, taking his weathered hands in hers.
"There's room here for forgiveness, for new beginnings, if you want them."
James looked at their joined hands, then up at Samuel. "The town, they're still divided. Some call you both heroes for standing against Morse's violence. Others will always fear what they don't understand." Samuel said, "We can't change that, but we can show them, day by day, that there's another way to live." "Yes," James said slowly. "Yes, I suppose you can." He squeezed Sarah's hands. "Your mother would have loved to see this, to see you like this, strong and certain and fully yourself."
"She did see it," Sarah said. "In her way, she saw it before any of us."
They talked for a while longer, the awkwardness slowly easing into something that might, given time, become understanding. When James finally prepared to leave, he paused at his horse. "I'll come again, if I'm welcome."
"You're my father," Sarah said simply. "You'll always be welcome."
He mounted, then looked back one more time.
"That young man, Tom Hutchins, he's been courting the minister's daughter, but he speaks of what happened here like it was a battle for the soul of the county. Says you two showed folks that courage isn't about never being afraid. It's about choosing love despite the fear."
"Tom's a good man," Samuel said. "He'll make a good sheriff. Better than good, if he keeps learning from examples like yours." James touched his hat brim. "Take care of each other." They watched him ride away. This man who'd found the courage to see past his own limitations. Around them, the work continued, neighbors building alongside neighbors, creating something stronger than any storm could break.
"The letter," Samuel said gently. "The land your mother left."
"We'll sell it," Sarah decided without hesitation. "Use the money to build a real barn, maybe add to the house, create something solid enough to last generations." Generations. He tested the word like wine on his tongue. "You think that far ahead now?"
"Don't you?"
She turned in his arms, looking up at his weathered face, the silver threading through his hair, the eyes that had seen so much but still held gentleness. "We've proven love can survive storms, Samuel. Now let's see what it can build in the sunshine." He kissed her then, there in their yard with hammers singing and new lumber rising where the old barn had burned. It was a kiss of promise, of partnership, of two people who'd waited and worked and chosen each other against all odds. When they parted, the widow Martinez called out from where she was directing the barn raising, "Save that for after the work's done. These walls won't build themselves." Laughter rippled through the workers, and Sarah felt it like a blessing. This was what they'd built, not just a ranch, but a community where love was celebrated, where differences were strengths, where mercy mattered more than old hatreds. As the sun climbed toward noon, Sarah worked alongside everyone else, her hands sure on hammer and nail. Samuel worked beside her when his wound allowed, their movements synchronized by months of partnership. They didn't need words. They'd said everything in their choices, in their stand against the storm, in their daily decision to build rather than tear down. By evening, the new barn's frame stood proud against the sky. The neighbors gathered for a meal Sarah and the other women had prepared, and stories flowed like water tales of other storms weathered, other bridges built between unlikely shores. "You've changed this valley," Martha Yellowbird said quietly to Sarah as they watched the men raise the final beam. "Maybe change the county. People will remember what happened here." "I hope they remember the right parts." Sarah replied, "Not the violence, but the choice that came after. Not the hatred, but the love that outlasted it." "Stories have a way of becoming what people need them to be," the old woman said wisely. "But the true story of a girl who loved at 18 and kept her promise, of a man who learned mercy is stronger than vengeance, Of neighbors who chose community over division, that story will last. It'll be told around fires and in quiet moments, wherever people need reminding that love is worth the wait, worth the work, worth the risk. As if to seal her words, Samuel appeared at Sarah's side, his hand finding hers with the ease of long practice. They stood together, watching their neighbors and friends celebrate the day's work, and Sarah felt the rightness of it settle into her bones. 4 years she'd waited. 4 years she'd worked to become someone worthy of the choice she'd made in the rain. Now, with the sun setting over their valley and their community gathered around them, she knew it had all been worth it. Every lonely night, every refused suitor, every moment of doubt, all of it had led here, to this life built on choice and courage and the kind of love that only grows stronger for being tested. "No regrets?" Samuel asked quietly, reading her thoughts as he so often did. "Not one," Sarah answered, and meant it with every fiber of her being. "I loved you at 18 with a girl's heart. Now I love you with a woman's soul deeper, truer, stronger for the knowing." "And I love you," he replied, "with everything I am and everything you've helped me become." The first stars appeared in the darkening sky, and Sarah made no wish upon them. She had everything she'd dreamed of and more, a love that had survived the storm, a community that chose bridges over walls, a future bright with possibility. In the end, that's what their story was really about, not just two people from different worlds finding each other, but the ripples that spread when love refuses to be bound by others' fears. They'd shown that patience could be its own kind of courage, that mercy could be its own kind of strength, and that sometimes the greatest rebellion is simply choosing to love without apology. The night settled gentle over their valley, and Sarah Mae Whitfield, rancher, partner, woman who'd kept her promises, was home. Thank you for listening to this story from the Wild West. Where are you listening from today? I'd love to hear from you in the comments below. Don't forget to subscribe to From Wild West channel and share your thoughts about Sarah and Samuel's journey. What did their story mean to you? Let's connect and share our love for these tales of courage and romance from the American frontier.